following program on Ada Derana 24 is classified for general audience. It is intended for all ages. It contains little or no violence, no strong language, and little or no sexual dialogue or situations.
Tonight, we discuss the developments of artificial intelligence and its ethical dilemmas. Can the legislature catch up to the exponentially advancing technology, or will it be too little, too late? A very good evening, and thank you for taking the time to join us on yet another episode of Law, Land and Liberty, where we bring to you key legal topics and break it down for the layman. Now, tonight's topic is something that we have touched on in episodes past, but really there's been a lot of development when it comes to this field, and that's artificial intelligence. Now, to speak about the specific aspects that we're going to discuss today, which is the legal frontiers and also the ethical dilemma when it comes to interacting with artificial intelligence, we have with us Ms. Thanuki Goonesinghe, attorney at law. Thank you very much, ma'am, for taking the time to speak to us today. A little bit of an introduction on our guest here. She is an attorney at law specializing in technology law and policy, and also guides conversations relating to technology policy through initiatives like AI Policy Bootcamp as well as the Tech Circle. Here's a bit of a breakdown on how we're going to approach the topic with us today. First, we're going to be talking about the current context and the recent developments that we've seen in the AI sphere since we last touched on this topic. Next, we'll be talking about the areas of concern legislatively as well as colloquially, and we're going to be talking about the specifics as well. Finally, we'll be talking about the future of AI in relation to a local as well as global context. All right, well, without any further ado, let's get right into the nitty-gritties of this topic. Of course, we have spoken about this topic before, but ma'am, thank you very much for trying to enlighten our viewers, specifically because of just how fast developing this topic is in real time. Before we get into any legal specifics, of course, I think it's important for us to get a little bit of an update on what exactly has happened across the globe, and also maybe a little bit on the local context as well when it comes to the advancement of AI and its involvement. Could you please give us a little bit of a look into the current global context and also some key updates?
Okay. So I do think a lot has happened globally since the last time you had a guest speak on this show, which is about 3 months ago. So I'm going to try and recap as much as I can, as quickly as I can. And mind you, I still won't be able to cover all of it. So Microsoft, an engineer, cautioned that the AI tool, Copilot, was generating explicit images and overlooking copyright regulations. Next, you have Elon Musk. He went and filed a lawsuit against OpenAI and Sam Altman for departing from the initial goal of OpenAI to develop AI for the betterment of humanity and rather shifting that focus towards profit-making motives. Then you have Microsoft again going in for a partnership with a French AI startup called Mistral, which expands Microsoft's partnerships beyond just OpenAI. Next, you have China's state TV channel broadcasting a first of its kind AI-developed cartoon series, right? And then you have the EU passing its landmark AI Act, which was endorsed by the European Parliament in March, and now it has received the final approval of the Council of EU on May 21st. So now it will come into operation in a staggered way. Then you have the UN approving the first AI resolution in March. Again, it was led by the United States, co-sponsored by 123 nations. It was adopted without a vote. World's first Neuralink patient. So Neuralink is a chip that is implanted in the brain. It's helped a patient play a game of online chess by using his thoughts alone. India, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology revised an advisory issue to major technology companies, removing them from this requirement to get government permission before deploying certain AI models and tools, because they were faced with a lot of backlash in that area. OpenAI unveiled a voice cloning tool, but determined it was too risky for public rollout and held it back. OpenAI appointed their first official based in India Pragya Misra. Now this is very important for Sri Lanka because now they're coming closer to us, right, in terms of representation. Then you have the most recent, Scarlett Johansson is poised to sue OpenAI over using a voice which is eerily similar to hers for their new chatbot. UK Automated Vehicles Act becomes law as it receives royal assent. This is very important because self-driving vehicles are now becoming a thing of the present as much as it is of the future. And Apple Intelligence was introduced, but during this time, Elon Musk has threatened to ban his employees from taking Apple devices into X because of this partnership between OpenAI and Apple. So there's a lot of interesting development, a lot of friction between the major tech players as well, and there's a lot of conversation around privacy and the impacts of AI in that space, and also image, likeness, so copyright, intellectual property concerns. So much is going on, so I mean, we have a lot to think about.
Exactly. We've seen a lot of developments, and just as you listed it off, across the globe we've seen either some nations wholly trying to embrace and regulate the entire technology that's developing, while others are seeing legal conflicts when it comes to personal levels and individuals that have seen their likeness being replicated in a way that is not comfortable or not permissible by them. I think now that we have a global context, a look into how the globe has been reacting to AI in the past couple of months since we last touched on this topic, locally, ma'am, what do we see in the current moment when it comes to the development of AI?
Okay, so if you're looking at regulatory aspects, we don't have regulations for artificial intelligence. If anything, we can look at maybe our privacy legislation, which is the Data Protection Act. There's a bit where they touch on automated data processing, but you know, that's pretty much it. There's not much to deal with that. But there are a few, how would I say, policy developments which are to be noted here. So the first thing is that we know that the 2024 national budget allocated a little over 1 billion Sri Lankan rupees, if I am assuming it's around that much, to support early AI advancements in Sri Lanka. Then there was an AI white paper which was published in March, and public input was sought for that. Not a lot of time was given for the public input, but still that option was made available to the public to, you know, give some feedback on what they think should happen. Driven by the Presidential Secretariat, the country is making strides when it comes to national AI strategy. Some key initiatives include forming a cross-sectoral committee which comprises academia, industry leaders to develop a 5-year national AI strategy. Then there are plans to establish a national AI center in line with this digital strategy up to 2030 to coordinate certain efforts. The President directed officials of the Ministry of Technology to establish a presidential task force for this. Then you have the National Digital Economy Strategy, which is there too, there is focus on different aspects. One of them is indicating the Ministry of Education to integrate IT and AI into the school curricula starting this year itself. And it also acknowledges certain critical enablers, and for me it's very important that they've recognized a robust legal and regulatory framework as a critical enabler for this digital economy strategy. And it also emphasizes the need to develop an AI and disruptive technology strategy playbook for Sri Lanka's public sector, which is very, very important because a lot of the conversations that we have and developments also are very much centered or focused in the private sector. And it is tough to pitch this to the state government public sector, so it is something we must try to penetrate. Just yesterday or day before, the Tech Ministry launched AI clubs for schools as a move towards improving AI literacy. And that's very important because this is taking AI to the grassroots. And yesterday, the IMF evaluated global readiness for artificial intelligence with its new AI preparedness index. In Sri Lanka, out of 174 economies that were kind of assessed for this, we scored 0.44 whereas many of the developed countries have achieved scores exceeding 0.8. I mean, we're at the somewhat of a halfway mark, we can say. Of course, there's a distance to go, but these are some of like the indications that we see of developments in Sri Lanka at present with regard to AI.
So, ma'am, what I begin to understand is locally, while it's not completely that we have fully embraced AI, but we are starting to pick it up. And there's been a little bit more conversation towards actually embracing AI and actually learning to go with the wave rather than completely shutting it out, because we've seen multiple months before that there was a little bit of an uproar, specifically in certain social circles, relating to rejection of AI and speaking about how AI would be causing a negative impact on either the education system, be it, or any other systems in Sri Lanka. What's your opinion on this, ma'am? Have we seen enough of an uptake when it comes to AI in Sri Lanka?
Well, Sri Lanka is very much a part of the, when it comes to the design, the development, use of AI, we're very much a part of it. We do provide these solutions to everywhere else in the world. So it makes very little sense to me as to why this is not relevant here. I do think where the problem lies is the fact that we fear a lot of change, and also we fear regulation. And we're also kind of struggling to strike a balance between regulation and innovation, along with everything else that we're going through as a country at the moment. But I definitely see that this conversation is now blossoming. And there's a lot that is happening in terms of conversations, even in private pockets. Though the question lies as to whether this conversation is also getting polarized in like the main city areas, especially Colombo. So that is something we need to think about.
Exactly. And relating to the legislative aspect, ma'am, I believe we tried to touch on that, but you mentioned that legislative-wise, we don't really have much of a progress when it comes to key pieces of legislature to actually regulate this technology. But we've seen a lot of policy decisions take place, as you just listed off to us previously. Do you believe that when it comes to other nations across the globe, we've seen legislation being passed, specifically in the EU, as you just mentioned, will we be trying to adopt that? Do you think that is a sustainable approach to legislature?
I don't know if it is right to say that we need to adopt the regulatory aspects of other regions. Of course, we can look at them and get some insight, get an idea, and then look at how we can make that relevant for Sri Lanka. I think that is the way to go. But sadly, I think Sri Lanka has this recurring trend of sitting back, watching what's going on, and then picking up some bits and bobs and trying to do something with it. Though I do see that we have the potential to be very progressive as well, as we saw with the Personal Data Protection Act and the process that was followed to really put out a piece of legislation that was well thought of and with public consultations, etc. So we do have the potential, but we don't see that potential being put to use all the time. So I think the same problem is going to be faced by us when it comes to this conversation on AI and regulation in that sphere as well.
Right. We're not completely an actionable nation. We see a lot of wait and see approaches, as we have in the past as well. But there is hope, of course, when it comes to trying to pick up legislature and not just falling behind the rest, specifically when it comes to a topic as quickly developing as artificial intelligence. We can't really afford to fall much further behind than we already have. But of course, we speak about legislation, ma'am, and we speak about policy in this discussion today. But I believe it's important for our viewers to understand what the actual significance is when it comes to the regulation of AI and why exactly it's essential or necessary in this context.
Excellent question. So there is a significant global development when it comes to or rather debate when it comes to this question of regulation, because we're often debating on how to approach this central concern, which is whether regulation will essentially provide the necessary oversight and protection that we seek, or whether it will stifle development and innovation. And there's always this challenge of striking a balance between these two considerations. And at the core of it, I see that there are two primary global perspectives, each led by major players, which illustrate this. So I'm just going to lay that down for you. The first is a very the American model, which focuses or emphasizes a lot of free speech, free internet, which fosters innovation. It is driven by a sense of techno-optimism, a lot of innovative kind of a strong belief in market forces as opposed to government regulation. And that is why we see the Silicon Valley being able to thrive as much, because there's not a lot of stringent regulation there. And here you're seeing the internet as a catalyst for economic prosperity, political freedom, and also societal progress. On the other hand, you have the European model, which is very rights-driven, rights-focused. So there we're envisioning governments playing a central role when it comes to ensuring that the digital economy and the regulatory measures are upholding an individual's rights and preserving the democratic structures that are there, and ensuring that there's a fair distribution of benefits, even within the digital economy. In my view, however, regulation is crucial. It shouldn't stem from a state of fear, but rather caution. We need to look at putting the precautionary principle at the forefront and guiding our approach to overseeing this technology. Somebody I read or follow a lot is Mustafa Suleyman, who is currently the CEO of Microsoft AI. He gave an excellent example, and he says, and I'm going to use that here because it really illustrates what this is about. Consider how we've regulated vehicles for decades. So along with cars and regulating cars, we're also regulating the streets, the traffic lights, road rules, crossings, all of that. And through that, we're enhancing overall transportation safety. Similarly, in AI, if you're prioritizing trust and safety and making that paramount, we're going to see the benefits of it. But the only way to see the benefits of that is we don't fear regulation, but just embrace it. It needs to be seen as something to support us and help protect us.
I believe that's why this conversation holds even much more significance when it comes to AI, and not just AI, but also emerging other technologies as well, because fear is the biggest setback in most cases. And instead of fearing, we need to be well educated about such topics and advocate for regulation and a safer environment to actually utilize these technologies. Well, we do have a lot more to discuss in relation to this topic, specifically when it comes to the judiciary as well, and also maybe the future of AI. But before we get into any of those specifics, let's go in for a very short commercial break. You're watching Law, Land and Liberty. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Law, Land and Liberty. We're in conversation with Ms. Thanuki Goonesinghe, attorney at law, and we're talking about artificial intelligence. Ma'am, we just left off on a very important segment that basically summarizes what exactly happened in the world when it comes to the legal aspects and also the development aspects of artificial intelligence, and just how quickly the situations have changed throughout the months since we last touched this topic. I believe since we have a good outlook on what exactly has happened and what has went down, it's important for us to touch on the specific area I believe that a lot of people will be interested in understanding, which is the areas of concern. Could you please explain to us what the specific potential areas for concern is when it comes to Sri Lanka's context?
Okay, so there'll be several points of concern, but I've picked about 5. So the first is privacy considerations. So we need to look at adaptations of the PDPA, which is the Personal Data Protection Act, to effectively address artificial intelligence impacts and safeguard user consumer data subject privacy. So in terms of this, we're yet to see how guidelines, so the Data Protection Act has this provision to introduce guidelines from time to time to address different aspects related to provisions of the Act. So we are yet to see how these guidelines are going to be used by the DPA, the Data Protection Authority, to tackle this ever-evolving creature that is AI. So that's the first concern. The second one is addressing disinformation and misinformation caused by generative AI, like deepfakes. Poses challenges because we have limited technology and expertise when it comes to detecting these in the first place, and also the absence of laws to explicitly deal with them. So that's something we need to be concerned about. Then I will just add here that we have this little controversial piece of legislation, which is the Online Safety Act. And that remains controversial even at this point of time, and inadequately addresses AI-related issues because it does not explicitly deal with that. That poses clarity concerns, especially now when elections are approaching. So that is going to be another thing we're going to deal with. Next, we need to look at preventing AI involvement in elections or campaigns lack sufficient safeguards. So it will jeopardize election integrity, voter rights, something to be thinking about. And the fifth thing is intellectual property laws are insufficient to address concerns where generative AI is used either to create something in its entirety or partially. Then comes the questions of ownership, authorship. How do you assign benefits, right? So we do not have much legal precedent in this specific area for Sri Lanka to rely on. Again, all of this leaves us in a state of confusion, lacking clarity, lots of ambiguity. So therefore, this becomes all of these become areas of concern for Sri Lanka.
Right. There are a lot of points to look at specifically, and a lot of the ones that you listed off just now, ma'am, have to deal with basically the integrity of certain movements, for example, election and voter rights as well. We just saw, I believe, just in the US and also India, when it comes to election campaigns, just how drastically AI can actually impact a voter's view on a certain candidate as well. And that could most definitely translate into our local context. But I believe it's important for me to ask you a little question of curiosity when it comes to this aspect. When it comes to deep fakes and also, you know, basically almost unrecognizable pieces of generative AI that have come onto the social sphere and that have been proliferated, where exactly do we see any sort of fundamental rulings or judgments that we have seen? Have we seen anything across the globe in relation to actually giving a decision by a court of authority relating to these things?
So there haven't been any concrete decisions as such, but there are movements, especially in the United States, with regard to deep fakes. So you have not just deep fakes, I mean using generative AI, even in terms of copyright, there's a plethora of cases that are currently ongoing. So we're yet to see what the ideas behind these are going to be, and those are going to be very relevant even for Sri Lanka to really look at and gain some insight from. So like I told you, we had this incident with Scarlett Johansson, right? So she's looking at ways to sue OpenAI for using her likeness. So that is regarding a deep fake. A lot of Indian actors filed police complaints. Okay, these are first steps, right? We're looking at how to deal with this. Filed police complaints because there were deep fakes of them talking about voting for different parties. There were, I mean, very controversial deep fakes that came up, especially to do with the Indian election. But still, human beings are very resilient. We've managed to kind of move past this, but then there's that question that comes up as to how long will it take for AI to reach a level where you cannot discern the differences? Then what is going to be a question. So the developments abroad is something that we need to keep an eye out for. Unfortunately, there's no concrete decision as yet with regard to things like deepfakes, but there is hope because there are ongoing cases to keep an eye out for.
I think now that we've spoken a lot about the legal aspects, it's important for us to actually think about our local context as well. Ma'am, are there specific strategies when it comes to the legislature or even judiciary that can be adopted in order to better regulate AI, or maybe even better harness the benefits of AI, or rein in any sort of malicious activities that could potentially occur?
Okay. So for the legislature, one thing we can look at is when developing some sort of legislation or a guideline, let's say, policymakers must decide between whether we want to go for like a horizontal or a vertical strategy. What is the difference between the two? A horizontal method means you're creating like a broad, comprehensive regulation or policy that addresses the wide-ranging impacts of AI across different sectors. So in contrast, the vertical approach means you're tailoring it to specific AI applications or types. So the EU, and if you take the EU and China on either side, you will see that they go for a mix of these strategies. So the EU AI Act is very horizontal, they're very sectoral, whereas China is more vertical because they look at regulating their algorithms. So this is something we can think about, because if you look at these two models, policymakers can gather some insights and you can come up with certain ways to regulate our own setup, because you need to look at something that is unique to Sri Lanka as well, not really a copy paste of what we see elsewhere. Also, something I've noticed is the EU established this AI Act in kind of connection to the GDPR, which is their data protection regulation. Kind of builds on existing levels of protection set by that law. Now, in contrast, if you look at the US, they lack a federal equivalent to the GDPR. So that leaves a void for them also when it comes to providing a foundation for AI legislation. Whereas Sri Lanka benefits from that, the presence of a Data Protection Act. We have something that is providing a framework on which we can build on and address these issues. So that's something to think about. If we capitalize on that and we leverage that to address AI, we have a pathway. The best pathway in would be that guideline provision that I told you about in the beginning. Another thing I think we need to get used to doing, which Sri Lanka doesn't have, is conducting a lot of research and publishing findings and engaging public consultations constantly. This happens a lot in other countries. Singapore, Hong Kong, which is closer to us, has also been engaged in things like this. Because when you do that, and it's a constant process, you're creating this dialogue and this thought pattern around policy, which we lack in Sri Lanka, significantly lack. So that's something we need to do. And in a way, these could act as like, I mean, you can't really exactly say it, but I would say to a certain extent like a soft law measure. Even though it's not hard law which is binding, it has a soft law impact. Having a guideline about how to use generative AI, let's say in the healthcare industry. Okay, some ideas are okay, the legal industry, okay, if we're using AI for our research, let's say we use ChatGPT, we draft a pleading and we submit it to court, and let's say we're giving out a list of documents or whatever, and we have quoted things there which ChatGPT told us about, but they're not in existence. There are plenty of cases for this abroad. You have the Avianca case, which was in the United States. All the judicial precedents were hallucinated by that artificial intelligence tool. Okay, but it was just submitted to court as it is. So these raise a lot of questions, right? But do we have any guideline to tackle this in our industry? No, we do not. So that is something we need to think about. Another aspect would be to encourage a lot of public-private partnerships. That's lacking a lot in Sri Lanka, and we need that, because the more collaborations that we foster in this way, we can leverage more expertise, more resources for responsible AI development. It is digital forensics that we will need to detect deep fakes. Okay, that will help in terms of creating integrity of information that is out there, and also investing in education and training. Building AI literacy, not just among lawmakers, educators, anything, just improving society as a whole to be more literate when it comes to this language. And also something that I picked up from the EU is how the EU complements the AI Act with core regulatory measures, like having regulatory sandboxes, updated liability policy to address AI-specific challenges, and also related legislation when it comes to data, market structures, online platforms, which we also can look at and try and experiment with, since we are also at the starting stages. So these are things that I think we can look at from other countries and then pick up on and come up with our own.
Exactly. I think the key point to take away from this is regulating AI is not a standalone measure, but we really need to work on existing features of legislature that we already have in action, and actually build upon the layers of protection that it already provides us with, so that there's a net basically that we can fall back on if in case there is some sort of lapse when it comes to the using of this tool that is AI. I believe we have to get to, the meat of this discussion, which is the ethical aspects when it comes to the space of AI. But before we get into any of the specifics, let's take a very short commercial break. You're watching Law, Land and Liberty. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Law, Land and Liberty. We're in conversation with Ms. Thanuki Goonesinghe, attorney at law, and we were just speaking about the importance of regulations of AI and the developments in that space as well. And I believe this would be one of, if not the most important segment when it comes to discussing this discussion specifically, and that's on the ethical aspects of artificial intelligence. We just spoke multiple times about the issues that we have seen pop up with the use of generative AI specifically, and also other types of AI. Could you please explain to us, ma'am, exactly how important the role of ethics is when it comes to the space of AI?
Okay. So I'm going to take a definition by the Alan Turing Institute on what is AI ethics. You can say that it is a set of values, principles, and techniques that employ widely accepted standards of right and wrong to guide moral conduct in the development and use of AI technologies. So that is just to give you some context, right? And why is the discussion of ethics significant here? It's because the first thing is we need to look at ways to prevent a few major tech companies from making critical value trade-offs, like deciding between things like privacy and security, or balancing things like free speech with hate speech or harassment, right? And this is where ethics becomes crucial, because ethics are in play only would you question whether there is enough global representation or regional representation when it comes to the design and development process of these tools. Now, for example, earlier this year, Google's Gemini AI service started generating very misleading and historically inaccurate images of Asian Nazis and black founding fathers, for example. So Google CEO Sundar Pichai addressed this controversy and said it is completely acceptable, and they basically suspended the tool availability for the public at the time, paused the ability to generate images of people. But how ethics came to play here is when he was interviewed, Pichai explained how users around the world use this product, and they search for images, right? So they will search for images of, let's say, teachers or nurses, and let's say I'm from India and you are from the US. You're both searching for the same thing. So there is a lot of difficulty to cater to such a diverse global audience. It is his ethical considerations that allowed him to say we made a mistake and pull it back, right? And that is one instance, rather the core aspect that we need to look at when it comes to the significance of ethics. And then the second thing I would highlight here is that we need to remember what is lawful is not always ethical, right? It should be a widely shared view, because in the commercial world, we're so concerned about getting our compliance right. Okay, so if we met the bare minimum and ticked off those check boxes, we think we're fine. But no, that is not the case. And we will see why as we go along in this discussion. So I just want to leave you with those two thoughts. One is, we cannot let major tech firms decide what is important to all of us without representation. Ethics lies at the core of that. And secondly, what is lawful is not always ethical. And sometimes in the absence of laws, which is mostly the case when it comes to this discussion, ethics should be the driving force, in my opinion.
Ethics is where the core of regulation should be gravitating towards, is what I'm understanding with this discussion. Of course, with technology like AI that could just so easily be taken well out of human control when it comes to the regulatory aspects, it's always important to leave a bit of a moral touch when it comes to actually using this technology. I believe we need to speak a little bit more in detail, as you just mentioned previously. We have to get into a little bit of the specifics when it comes to ethics as well. There's a lot of gray areas when it comes to the technology that is AI. Could you give us a little bit of a look into how ethics actually translates when it comes to technologies like AI, and also some recently seen key considerations, ethical considerations, just like Google has done so with Gemini, if there's anything else that you would like to enlighten us on?
Okay. So the best way for me to explain this to you is if we look at privacy. And I keep going back to this because we cannot discuss AI without discussing privacy. AI and data regulations today mirror a shift in societal focus. We were not so much private individuals before, but now there is so much conversation with historical events, with certain advancements that have happened in tech, which has caused like explosive amounts of personal data being scraped and collected and stored and processed. And this has led to raising a lot of ethical questions about how is my personal data being handled by tech giants. So if you remember, this conversation about data privacy, I think people remember it because of the GDPR, which came up in 2018. But how did the GDPR come to being? If you remember, there was that whistleblower incident of Edward Snowden in 2013. And then I think about 2-3 years after that, I think around 2015, 2016, you had the Cambridge Analytica situation, right? And these are certain key events. And these kind of pushed governments and regions to rethink this idea of privacy. Now we're talking about a right to be forgotten. Okay, there was no such consideration before this time, but now there is. Why? Because you know that there are ways to indefinitely store data in untraceable ways, right? And it is ethical considerations, ethical norms of society that has led us to this point to have not just the GDPR but also have that ripple effect of laws and privacy regulations everywhere. So now, based on that, I will say tech companies are essentially creating a lot of new tech, but the negative implications of that, the negative externalities are being borne by society more than the tech companies. And it has a lot to do with the fact that there's a massive optimization mindset, because when it comes to tech companies, they're all about fulfilling certain metrics. So there's that constant struggle that tech companies are going through. Okay, I need to be rolling out more product, but okay, there's also this ethical side of it. And that's why now we've been hearing a lot of layoffs of ethicists in a lot of these major tech companies, Twitch, X, OpenAI, right? Raising a lot of concerns. Okay, why are they getting rid of these people? This is an important consideration to have. So, considering all of this, what are the key ethical considerations? So that was to give you a bit of context. And so now some considerations. One of the things is we need to look at fostering a culture where we have a shared ethical vocabulary within companies, within firms. It doesn't need to be companies that are building or creating tech alone. We're talking about anywhere else that uses this tool. You need to have an ethical vocabulary. What do we allow? What do we not allow? red teaming, saying these are prohibited areas, we're not going to deal with this kind of things. Very important. Then we need to look at principles. These are very legal principles, but of importance is individual autonomy, okay, personhood, preventing harm, promoting well-being, ensuring equal treatment, equal freedom, dignity, right, protecting civil, political, social rights, and the right to participation in community life. These are essential principles to be considered. Then the principle of discriminatory non-harm, which requires AI designers. I mean, this is relevant because you have Sri Lankans who are very much a part of this designing and development process. We do have the minds and the skills behind this. You need to ensure that your systems do not cause discriminatory, inequitable impacts. Data fairness, design fairness, outcome fairness, implementation fairness, all different principles that are important considerations. Then we need to look at creating accountability by design. Now, when this privacy discussion came about, the conversation is a lot about privacy by design. Every single organization, institution needs to look at how you embed privacy in the design of whatever steps it is that you intend to take. Okay, it can even be a media outlet. How do you protect privacy and make sure privacy is a part of your organization? It has to be a living aspect of the organization. Similarly, accountability is equally important. Transparency by design, equally important when it comes to AI. Carrying out stakeholder impact assessments, not after the thing is done, but rather from the get-go, while it's happening, after it has happened, reassessments. It has to be throughout the life cycle of an AI system. And embedding ethics. Now, this is an integral component of engineering courses in the United States, in Stanford, at Berkeley, and it is inescapable. It's embedded everywhere. So you can't be like, this is an elective, I'm not going to take it. This is something Sri Lankan tertiary education should look at. And in fact, maybe not just tertiary education. Look at how we approach citizenship education. Have digital citizenship as an embedded part of the curriculum. That is the way to go. And lastly, an important ethical consideration in anything to do with AI is broadening representation. Every single player needs to have a voice in this process. Tough ask, but we need to try to achieve it as much as we can, is what I have to say.
Exactly. Unfortunately, while there is a lot more for us to discuss, I believe that is the perfect note for us to, unfortunately, end this discussion on, as we have come to time. Thank you very much, ma'am, for actually taking the time to enlighten our viewers when it comes to the developments of AI and also the significance when it comes to considering ethics in this AI landscape. I believe we would have learned a lot with this discussion here today. Thank you very much for your time, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right, well, artificial intelligence is an area that continues to see new developments constantly, and we always have to stay vigilant in understanding how this technology will shape the future of our nation's advancement. We leave you tonight with the words of Professor Oren Editsonoli. AI is a tool. The choice about how it gets deployed is our own. That's all we have for you tonight on Law, Land and Liberty. If you had missed any of today's programs, you can always rewatch by catching us on our YouTube page, youtube.com/othertharenglish. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good night.